Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When a reclusive man escapes to the wild Colorado mountains seeking silence, he finds peace until an aggressive HOA sets its sights on his land. What begins with a sign sparks an all-out war of property rights, power plays, and one man's battle to defend his mountain. When I first moved up here, I didn't come looking for peace. I came looking for silence. The kind of silence you can't find in a city or in some little suburb pretending to be nature. I wasn't interested in fresh air flavored by barbecue smoke or scenic views ruined by someone else's hot tub. I wanted the real thing, the kind of stillness that hums through your bones. And I found it. The cabin wasn't much to look at in the beginning. It was a rough shell I built myself out of good old Colorado timber, perched right near the summit of a ridge that practically scraped the sky. 90 acres of forest, brush, and rock, all mine, inherited from my grandfather, who had fought tooth and nail to keep developers off this land long before I was old enough to understand what a boundary line even meant. He left it to me, along with a box of old maps, a .22 rifle with a carved elk on the stock, and a single sentence in his will. Let the ridge stay wild. It took me 2 years to finish the cabin. I quit my job in Seattle. Senior design engineer, fancy title, fat paycheck, slowly dying inside, and drove away from everything I thought made sense. Divorce papers in the rear view, therapy sessions left unread in my inbox. Up here, no one cared how well I could structure a project timeline. The squirrels certainly didn't. I made a life. Quiet mornings with coffee brewed over fire, days spent tracking elk through the trees, nights writing about the psychology of solitude for niche blogs that paid just enough. I set up solar panels, learned to fix everything with baling wire and duct tape, and even figured out how to cook half-decent sourdough. Every corner of the land started to feel like an extension of my body. Every crackle in the woods was familiar. Every gust of wind off the ridge carried the same cold kiss that reminded me I was exactly where I was supposed to be. That was before they came. It started innocently enough. One morning, I noticed the distant echo of construction, jackhammers, steel beams dropping, backup beepers from trucks grinding up the slope below. I didn't think much of it. Progress happens. Let the world pave itself, as long as they didn't get within earshot. But over the next few weeks, I began to see things I didn't like. A new road was carved into the base of the ridge, wider than anything the Forest Service ever built, lined with stone retaining walls and black street lamps that looked like something out of a golf resort. A sign went up, future site of Silver Ridge Mountain Community. I stared at it for a long time. The word community gave me hives. Still, I figured I'd be left alone. After all, my cabin sat halfway up a switchbacked trail that didn't even show up on Google Maps. It was a half-hour drive just to reach my mailbox, and that was on a good day when the mud didn't try to eat my tires. These people were building manicured little palaces in the valley. What would they want with my wind-rattled, wood-smelling, chimney-stained piece of heaven? 3 days later, I got my answer. It was a laminated sign nailed to a pine tree, about 20 feet from the edge of my access road. White letters on dark blue plastic, professionally printed. Welcome to Silver Ridge HOA, Mountain Preserve Zone, access restricted. I stood there for a while staring at it. There was no mistaking the implication. According to this sign, I was now trespassing on my own damn land. I tore the sign down without ceremony, stuffed it into the back of my truck, and drove to town. The county records office hadn't moved an inch in 40 years, and the clerk behind the counter was still the same guy who used to hand out voter pamphlets back when my grandfather was alive. His name was Joe, and he smelled like pipe tobacco and distrust. "Hey, Joe," I said, unrolling my copy of the land plat across the counter. "Has anyone been playing with parcel boundaries up on Ridge 4? Joe looked over his reading glasses, frowned, and slowly ran a calloused finger along the lines. "Not that I see," he muttered. "You're still listed as sole owner from marker 38 down to the creek line. Why?" I slid the folded sign across the counter. Joe raised an eyebrow. "Well now, ain't that a fancy bit of plastic?" He leaned in closer, then shook his head. "Far as the county's concerned, no HOA owns spit up there. You sure they're not just confused?" "About 90 acres confused." Joe chuckled, the kind of chuckle that said he'd seen this before, and it never ended with just one sign. "You want me to flag it? I can add a note that this land's been challenged." "Not yet," I said. "Let's see how far they want to go." By the time I got back up the ridge, the wind had kicked up, whistling through the spruce trees like a warning. I parked the truck and stared down toward the valley where tiny rooftops were starting to sprout from the dirt like mushrooms after rain. They were close enough now that I could see the glare of sunlight off glass balconies. I didn't like it. That night, I sat on the porch with a whiskey and watched the stars shift. Somewhere below, someone had turned on string lights, golden dots in a tidy row along the edge of their half-built dream homes. The contrast made my stomach turn. I wasn't angry. Not yet. But I had the same feeling I used to get on job sites when a project manager would casually suggest stretching the design tolerances to save money. It always started with a small cheat, then the foundation cracked. The next morning, I woke up to find fresh tire tracks halfway up my road. I hadn't invited anyone. I followed the tire tracks up the gravel road that morning, boots crunching frost as I walked with a mug of black coffee in hand. The prints were wide, deep, off-road tread, something heavy, and they hadn't been there yesterday. Whoever it was, they'd gotten halfway up the slope before turning back. That narrowed the suspects down. No one besides me ever made it this far, not unless they were lost or looking to be. I didn't have to wait long for the mystery to solve itself. Just before noon, I heard the distinct whine of a gas-powered engine slicing through the quiet. A quad bike. Unmistakable. It clawed its way up the ridge trail like it had something to prove, kicking up a tail of dust as it crested the bend and emerged into the clearing in front of my cabin. Behind it followed two more vehicles, smaller utility carts painted with an HOA logo I'd never seen up close before. Then she stepped off the quad like she was dismounting a steed she'd personally conquered. Blonde bob, aviator sunglasses, branded fleece vest zipped up tight over a moisture-wicking blouse. Clipboard in hand, smirk already locked and loaded. She stood with her hands on her hips and let her eyes sweep across my cabin like it was a suspicious stain she intended to report to management. "Good afternoon," she called out brightly. "Are you the property resident?" I leaned against the porch post, arms crossed. "I'm the owner." She nodded like that confirmed something terrible. "Excellent. Karen Bradley, president of the Silver Ridge Homeowners Association. We're conducting a boundary compliance review and noticed your structure doesn't appear to meet several of our community standards." "Community standards," I repeated, blinking. "Yes. Architectural conformity, fire safety codes, environmental harmony." She glanced at her clipboard, tapping her pen. "And I'm afraid your porch flag is also non-compliant." I glanced over my shoulder at the American flag fluttering gently in the breeze. Stars and stripes. Nothing more, nothing less. "I'm not part of your HOA," I said flatly. Karen didn't flinch. "Actually, that's where it gets a little murky. You see, we recently incorporated the surrounding mountain preserve as part of our broader community plan. We've submitted paperwork to the county and expect final confirmation within the quarter. It's all part of our environmental stewardship initiative." She handed me a neatly printed envelope. "Preliminary violation notice," it read. I opened it slowly, scanning the bullet points. Chimney does not meet Class A fire suppression specs. Exterior wood stain not on approved HOA pallet. Visible flagpole deemed disruptive to uniform skyline views. Non-conforming structure lacks. Formal approval under Article 4, Section 12 of the SRHOA Covenant. I lowered the paper and stared at her. "Lady, this cabin's been here longer than your subdivision has had plumbing. My grandfather built the first trail up this ridge before your HOA was a glimmer in a bureaucrat's spreadsheet." Karen gave a tight, polite laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "I understand this must be confusing, but with all due respect, your emotional attachment to the land doesn't exempt you from shared governance." "I didn't share anything," I said. "This is private land. I've got the deed in a fireproof box inside." "I'm sure you do," she said, with the same tone you'd use on a child holding a crayon drawing of a car. "But property maps evolve, and from our current planning overlays, this ridge is designated as part of our community's northern corridor." "That's so?" "Yes," she continued, smiling. "We'd love to bring you into the fold. There's a welcome package, of course. And if you'd be willing to schedule an architectural review within the next 30 days, we can help guide the process of bringing your cabin into compliance. Our landscaping team can assist with erosion control, and we'd be happy to repaint your facade in a more neutral earth tone." I stared at her, not because I was stunned, though I was, but because I was trying to determine if she was serious or just cosplaying a corporate villain. This land isn't part of Silver Ridge, I said slowly. I own everything from the creek bed up to the summit. I've got old surveys, new surveys, and a damn handwritten note from the guy who homesteaded it. Karen's smile stiffened just enough to register. I'd encourage you to double-check those documents, she said. We'll be sending follow-ups. In the meantime, please consider this your first formal notice. If the violations aren't resolved within 30 days, you may be subject to fines of up to $100 per day, per infraction. We're very flexible if you're cooperative. Her two assistants, a man and a woman in matching HOA vests, busied themselves taking pictures of my cabin, measuring the height of my deck with a tape measure, and writing something down about the shape of my fire pit. Are they trespassing? I asked. Karen didn't answer directly. This area is under review. We're allowed preliminary access under HOA integration protocols. I stepped off the porch, walked directly up to the man with the tape measure, and stopped 2 inches from his face. Get office my land. Karen raised her hand in protest. Sir, there's no need for hostility. I said leave, I growled. I don't know what fantasy jurisdiction you think you've conjured up down there in HOA Valley, but none of it applies here. You're guests on private property, and you've overstayed your welcome. The woman assistant mumbled an apology as she retreated to her buggy. The man followed, not bothering to pocket his tape. Karen stood her ground a moment longer, lips twitching like she wanted to say something sharp and devastating, but couldn't quite find the words. Instead, she reached into her folder and slapped one more envelope against my chest. You'll be hearing from our legal committee, she said, turning on her heel and climbing onto her quad like some doomed general retreating from an unwinnable battle. They disappeared down the road in a storm of dust, leaving me standing in the clearing with 2 pieces of paper in my hand and the overwhelming sense that the peace I'd built up here was about to be tested like never before. I didn't sleep much that night, not because I was rattled. I'd had worse show up at my doorstep than a bureaucrat in yoga pants, but because something about Karen's confidence stuck in my teeth. That clipboard of hers wasn't just a prop. She genuinely believed she had jurisdiction over my ridge, and belief like that is dangerous when paired with power. By morning, I had a plan. I drove down into town, found the only geodetic surveyor still working in our sleepy part of Colorado, an old-timer named Ellis with half a beard and a fully loaded drone. I showed him my deed, the tax maps, and the violation notice Karen had so graciously delivered. He laughed once, then agreed to come up the ridge for a fresh boundary scan. 2 days later, Ellis launched his drone into the blue and let it hum along the property lines. We spent the afternoon walking, verifying corner markers, comparing GPS overlays to the original plats. When he was done, he pulled up the digital survey and grinned. From the base of that creek bed to the northern peak, all of it's yours, he said. Not even a sliver overlaps with Silver Ridge. Not according to their HOA president, I said. Well, he replied, maybe she's using a magic map. I thanked him, took the printouts, and mailed a copy to Karen's HOA office, along with a notarized letter stating that any further encroachment would be treated as trespassing under state law. Then, just for fun, I added a postscript. My cabin complies with the only authority that matters, gravity. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. A week later, I got a certified envelope stamped with the HOA seal. Inside were 3 more citations, one for the unauthorized chimney, another for non-conforming facade materials, and the last, absurdly, for flying an unregistered flagpole. Each citation came with a threat, $100 per day, pursuit, violation if I didn't bring the property into compliance. That same day, a new sign appeared near the bottom of the ridge, Northern Ridge Zone, under community oversight. Report all hazards to Silver Ridge, HOA. They weren't backing off, they were doubling down. I drove down and tore that sign out of the ground, tossed it in the back of my truck, and replaced it with one of my own, private property. Not subject to HOA. Trespassers will be prosecuted. Then I went one step further. I hired a crew from town to install a heavy-duty solar-powered gate with an access keypad and remote lock. I put it halfway up the road, right where the incline gets serious. Not cheap, but cheaper than lawsuits. The next morning, I stood at the top of the ridge and watched 2 HOA golf carts roll up the road, stop at the gate, then reverse like roaches when the kitchen light flips on. That should have been satisfying. But later that afternoon, I spotted a car parked at the trailhead below. a tour-style SUV with Silver Ridge scenic walks stenciled on the side. A dozen people with cameras and hiking boots stood behind it, gawking up the slope like it was Yellowstone, and leading them was Karen. She pointed up the hill, holding what looked like a pamphlet. I grabbed my binoculars. Sure enough, she was giving a tour of my land. My jaw locked. I started marching down the trail, ready to rip into her, but I didn't get the chance. Karen tried to climb over the gate. She got halfway before her long cardigan snagged on the top wire. One foot caught, the other kicked wildly, and then, God bless karma, she went full scarecrow. Legs dangling, one shoe off, yelling for someone to help her down while half the tour group filmed her with their phones. I just stood there in the trees and watched. The next morning, the video was everywhere. Reddit, TikTok, even a Facebook group called HOA Hall of Shame. They dubbed her Carantula. And just like that, it stopped being quiet. For about 48 hours after the Carantula incident, things went unusually quiet. No new letters, no tire tracks up my road, no HOA-branded golf cart sniffing around the base of the ridge. It was the kind of silence that usually means someone's either giving up or reloading. By the end of the week, the answer arrived in the form of an unmarked white SUV crawling up the road like a tick. 2 men in polos stepped out, flashed badges from the county fire department, and politely informed me that they were here for an unannounced fire risk inspection related to recent complaints. I played dumb. Complaints from who? They shrugged like it didn't matter. I invited them in. I walked them through the whole cabin. The chimney had a triple insulated flue. Fire extinguishers, 1 in every room. No open wiring, no propane leaks, no dry brush within 50 feet of the structure. They checked, photographed, asked a few technical questions that I answered too confidently for their comfort. By the end, one of them was openly impressed. "Honestly," he said, "you're cleaner than most new construction." They left with smiles and a few apologies, promising to update the file. I knew it wouldn't matter. Karen hadn't filed a complaint to win. She filed it to create noise. And the noise kept coming. 3 days later, it was zoning officials. Then the Department of Natural Resources. Then a pair of young men with clipboards who claimed to be from Silver Ridge Eco Harmony, an HOA offshoot apparently, wanting to survey non-native flora impacts on what they called the Northern Ridge Recreation Zone. I turned them around at the gate before they even finished their sentence. By now, I was documenting everything. Every badge, every car, every paper shoved under my door went into a growing folder labeled HOA Nonsense Evidence. I installed 2 more trail cams along the ridge, upgraded the gate keypad to include license plate recognition, and even put up a fake motion-activated drone surveillance in use sign. Karen, meanwhile, stayed quiet. Too quiet. Then I got an email from a guy named Trent, a landscaper I'd hired years back when I first moved up here. He'd taken a job in Silver Ridge recently and overheard something interesting. During a project meeting, Karen had presented an internal development map that included a proposed scenic gondola station marked directly on the plateau, half a mile behind my cabin. On my land, she was pitching a tourist attraction, a cable car that would run from the HOA Welcome Center straight up to what she called Observation Peak. She even mentioned pending negotiations with a private owner, me. Except there were no negotiations. Just a woman in a fleece vest trying to manifest reality through paperwork. I asked Trent if he could get a copy of that map. He said he'd try. While I waited, I paid a visit to my lawyer. Her name was Amy Garner. Practical, mid-40s, 0 patience for HOA drama. Her office smelled like toner and litigation. I dumped the entire folder of printed nonsense on her desk and gave her the short version. Amy flipped through the documents with growing irritation. They forged jurisdictional maps. They initiated administrative action without standing. And now they're attempting to justify capital development on land they don't own. Correct. She looked up. Deadpan. Oh, I'm going to enjoy this. We spent the next few days drafting formal notices. 1 to Silver Ridge HOA, 1 to the county commissioner, 1 to the state attorney general's office, just to spice things up. We demanded a full retraction of any documentation claiming my land was part of the HOA. We cited trespass, harassment, fraud, and an intent to misappropriate private property for public use. We sent them certified with return receipts. And then, because I'm a fan of symmetry, I replaced the old warning sign at my gate with a new one. Big, bold letters, laser-etched into aluminum. Private Mountain Ridge. Not affiliated with Silver Ridge. HOA trespassers will be reported and ridiculed. The very next morning, someone left a handwritten note on my gate in red marker. You're not above the community. You will comply. I took a photo. Amy filed it under implied threats. 2 days later, Trent came through. He sent me a grainy photo of the internal HOA map. Sure enough, my land was labeled Proposed Phase 3 Development Zone. Not only the gondola, but a snack bar, viewing deck, even a zip-line trail looping through my eastern tree line. The map had the gall to include potential expansion subject to HOA easement approval. No mention of needing, say, the actual landowner's permission. That night, I sat on my porch, sipped whiskey, and looked out across the moonlit ridge. I wasn't angry. I was ready. The first lawsuit didn't come from Karen directly. That would have required more courage than she had. No, it came from the Silver Ridge Legal Oversight Committee, an HOA subunit that sounded like a high school debate club with a fax machine. The envelope was thick, stamped, and smug. Amy read it in 5 minutes and tossed it across her desk like it was wet trash. They're suing you, she said, for defamation, obstruction of community development, and, she squinted at the page, non-cooperation with area beautification efforts. I laughed. Beautification. They think your cabin is an eyesore. I looked out the window. The view from Amy's office was concrete and a sad strip mall. From my porch, I could see the Rockies breathe. Let them try. Amy filed a motion to dismiss the same day and added a counterclaim for harassment and malicious intent. Then she did something Karen hadn't expected. She subpoenaed the HOA's internal documents, emails, development plans, financial records, everything. That's when the cracks started to show. Over the next week, we received 3 anonymous tips. First, from a former HOA board member who'd quietly resigned last spring. He claimed Karen had redrawn the HOA's jurisdiction map herself, using a Google Earth screenshot and a ruler. Then, a city planner emailed us a scanned memo showing that Silver Ridge had tried to get the county to rezone part of my land as mixed-use recreational space. The request was rejected twice. The third tip came from a bombshell. One of Karen's own contractors sent Amy a document marked internal only. It was a pitch deck for investors promoting Silver Ridge Phase 3 Elevated Escape. The centerfold diagram showed a gondola station, snack kiosk, and luxury mountaintop cabins, built exactly where my outhouse currently stood. The kicker, it included projected profits from ticketed tours, plus a bullet point that read, negotiation with current landholder expected to resolve in HOA favor via zoning pressure. I nearly choked on my coffee. Amy just nodded. That's it. We sue. She filed an expanded lawsuit, not just against the HOA, but personally against Karen and 2 named board members. The claims included intentional misrepresentation of land boundaries, filing of fraudulent documents with county departments, civil trespass, harassment, and coercion, attempted unlawful appropriation of private property. We also sent the entire document package to the local press, labeled simply, When HOA Becomes Mafia. The response was swift. The regional news picked it up first. Landowner versus HOA, gondola greed sparks legal war. And then the national blogs caught scent. One article called me the last free man in Colorado. Another ran a side-by-side of Karen's viral fence flop video next to the gondola plans under the headline, Karen wants a cable car, gets caught in a web. Karen predictably panicked. She called a public emergency HOA meeting. I wasn't invited, but a Silver Ridge resident leaked the minutes. Apparently, Karen insisted the entire thing was a gross misunderstanding, that I was blowing things out of proportion, and that the HOA had never had formal plans to build anything on privately owned land. Unfortunately for her, we had it all, in writing. And then came the inspections. Again, over the next 10 days, I got visits from County Zoning, Environmental Protection, Fire Marshal, Soil Erosion Bureau, Historical Architecture Review Committee, which was hilarious since my cabin was built in 2014. None of them found a thing. They walked in skeptics and walked out admirers. One guy even asked me for sourdough starter before he left. I started printing out my cleared inspection reports and stapling them to a new bulletin board next to the gate. I called it the HOA scoreboard. It drove Karen insane. The last straw was the Community Integrity Newsletter, a 4-page rant mailed to every resident in Silver Ridge, written by Karen herself. It accused me of holding the mountain hostage, claimed I was squatting on potentially valuable communal land, and said I was disrespecting collective harmony. I didn't respond. I just laminated the letter and posted it next to the scoreboard with a sign, "Today's complaint, mountain man breathing wrong." The HOA's grip started slipping. Residents began asking questions. A few emailed me to apologize. One guy dropped off a 6-pack of craft beer and said, "Not all of us are crazy." Even Trent, the landscaper, told me the HOA board was fracturing behind closed doors. Some wanted Karen gone before the lawsuit went to trial. But Karen, she doubled down. Again. One night, I woke up to lights flashing at the bottom of the ridge. A landscaping crew was trying to plant native trees at the edge of my road, on my property. I came down with my camera, took photos, told them to leave. They said they were just following HOA orders. I sent everything to Amy. She sent another cease and desist. The very next day, I found a fresh citation taped to my gate. This one claimed I had violated community lighting codes by installing motion-activated trail lights. That's when I stopped playing defense. There's a moment in every fight when the weight shifts. You don't always notice it at first, not until the one who kept throwing punches starts stumbling backward. That moment came for me on a Tuesday morning, with a knock on my cabin door and a thin man in a tie holding a clipboard like it was a crucifix. "Mr. Stewart," he asked, "I'm with the state auditor's office. Mind if we talk?" I did not mind. He wasn't here for me. He was here for Silver Ridge HOA. Turns out the documents we'd leaked, especially the internal development map and the investor pitch deck, had triggered something bigger than Karen expected. The county had referred the matter to the state, and the state doesn't like it when private associations fabricate jurisdiction to inflate taxable value and attract development money. The man stayed for 2 hours, asked smart questions, took photos, jotted notes. At one point, he looked up from his clipboard and said, "She really tried to build a gondola on your outhouse." "Yeah," I said. "Would have made for a hell of a scenic ride." The day after his visit, I received an email from Amy. Short and to the point. Preliminary injunction approved. They are forbidden from any contact, construction, or planning related to your land until court resolution. It felt like breathing for the first time in weeks. But Karen wasn't done. Oh no. That woman would have staged a coup in a preschool to assert dominance over the snack table. That Friday, she filed a motion of her own, petitioning the court to issue a temporary compliance order that would force me to submit to Silver Ridge community standards during the lawsuit. Her argument? That while the property's ownership was under dispute, HOA jurisdiction must remain in effect to prevent environmental degradation and community tension. Amy laughed so hard she choked on her coffee. We filed an emergency rebuttal and included a 30-page dossier titled History of Harassment and Fabricated Authority by HOA Representatives. It had timestamps, photos, contractor statements, and a full transcript of the infamous Carentula video, now sitting at over 3 million views. The judge didn't just deny her motion, he reprimanded her attorney on record for procedural overreach bordering on contempt. That's when the public really turned. Karen, who once held HOA town halls like a suburban monarch, was now the butt of local late-night talk shows. One clip edited her dangling on the fence with dramatic violin music, and the subtitle, "Queen of the Ridge, Suspended Between Realms." I kept quiet. That was the strategy now. Stay steady, let the pressure cook her. But then came the retaliation I didn't expect. One morning I came outside and found my fence gate wide open, the lock cut clean through. My generator, bolted behind the cabin, was missing. Just gone. No note, no tag, no witnesses. I called the sheriff. He came, took a report, nodded gravely, and said, "A lot of folks unhappy with you lately, huh?" "Not unhappy," I said. "Just unaccustomed to being told no." Amy filed a separate police report and submitted it as evidence of ongoing harassment. She added theft and property damage to the suit. The list was getting long. In response, Karen launched a full PR blitz. She claimed in the HOA newsletter that I was falsely accusing the community of crimes, inciting division, and, my favorite, weaponizing isolationism against progress. Meanwhile, one of her own board members resigned, publicly. In a letter addressed to the residents, he wrote, "This is not the community I agreed to serve. We are not developers nor vigilantes. This man owns his land. We were wrong to challenge that. I printed it, framed it, and hung it in my outhouse, right above the spot where Karen wanted to install her luxury espresso kiosk. Still, the attacks kept coming. Trail cams caught strangers walking along my tree line at dusk. One left a dead squirrel on my porch, positioned upright, like it had been posed. Another threw nails across my driveway. Every time I documented it. Every time I sent it to Amy. This isn't just overreach anymore, she told me. This is a vendetta. But here's the thing Karen never understood. The more she escalated, the more she exposed herself. Every stunt, every broken rule, every intimidation tactic made her look like exactly what she was. A petty tyrant with a clipboard and a god complex. And in court, that matters. Because when we filed our updated motion, now 300 pages thick, we included everything. The theft, the harassment, the fake zoning request, the investor pitch deck, the tour group trespass, the fence flop viral video, and now the physical. Sabotage. The judge scheduled the trial, public hearing, live streamed. Karen wanted a kingdom. She was about to get a courtroom. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not just in temperature, though someone clearly thought the thermostat should mimic an icebox, but in atmosphere. It was the kind of cold that settles between your ribs, where tension and fluorescent lights mix. Amy looked like a war general in slacks. I looked like a man who hadn't shaved in 3 weeks because he'd been too busy defending his land from a suburban cult. Karen showed up wearing pearls. Real or fake, I couldn't tell, but they clashed with the absolute panic on her face. She had 2 lawyers. One was young and smug. The other looked like he'd defended HOA bylaws since the Eisenhower administration. The judge was sharp, direct, and visibly annoyed that this nonsense had escalated to his courtroom. "This is not a zoning forum," he began. "This is a property rights case, and I expect both sides to treat it with the seriousness it deserves." We did. Sort of. Amy opened like a scalpel, surgical, clean, and with zero patience for Karen's theatrics. She laid out our case with cold facts and calm fury, pointing first to the deed, then the certified surveyor report, then the aerial maps dating back to the 1960s. There was no gray area. I owned from the bottom of the ridge to the tree line and everything in between. Then came the good stuff. Amy played the video of Karen's uninvited inspection tour, showing her straddling my fence like a confused scarecrow, screaming something about property integration. The court clerk audibly laughed. The judge banged his gavel once and told the gallery to stay composed. Then she introduced Exhibit H, the investor pitch deck from Silver Ridge HOA that projected profits from attractions to be built, verbatim, on the currently unclaimed ridgeline. "Currently unclaimed," Amy repeated slowly, looking at Karen. Despite the landowner holding the deed for over 2 decades, she brought up every incident. The forced inspections, the false reports, the tree planting sabotage, the stolen generator, the nails in the driveway, the newsletter libel, and finally the threats, documented, photographed, printed, and delivered with the mechanical rhythm of a well-oiled fax machine. Karen's team responded by trying to cast me as a hostile recluse, obstructing regional development. They insisted that the HOA had acted in the spirit of community growth and had simply misunderstood the boundary implications of adjacent wilderness land. The judge interrupted. "Are you claiming you mistook private property for a community park?" Silence. Then came the cross-examination. Karen took the stand. Amy didn't attack. She peeled, one layer at a time. Calm questions, paper evidence, small contradictions. Karen denied knowing about the gondola plans. Amy showed her email approving the design. Karen said she never intended to build on my land. Amy revealed the map with the snack kiosk labeled Southwest Ridge Deck. Karen claimed she didn't authorize inspections. Amy showed 5 HOA board meeting minutes signed by Karen, specifically targeting my parcel. And then Amy asked casually, "Are you aware that the landowner is not and never has been a member of your HOA?" Karen blinked. "Well, it's complicated." "No," Amy said, "it's really not." When my turn came, I kept it simple. I talked about my grandfather, about the peace I came here for. I explained how the land was my home, not just physically, but emotionally. I told the court that I hadn't picked this fight, but I wasn't going to run from it either. The gallery was full by the end of the day. Reporters, locals, even a few folks from Silver Ridge who'd emailed me apologies now came to watch Karen twist in her own web. Closing arguments were brutal. Amy invoked property law, precedent cases, and the fundamental right to be left the hell alone on your own land. Karen's side mumbled something about visionary leadership. The judge took a week to deliberate. In the meantime, things got real quiet in Silver Ridge. No more newsletters, no more inspectors. The trail cams stayed blank. Then the ruling came. I was in my cabin chopping wood when Amy called. She didn't waste time. "We won," she said. Big. Here's how the judge ruled. Karen was found personally liable for trespassing, harassment, and attempted fraud. The HOA was ordered to pay $750,000 in damages for civil overreach, property violation, and emotional distress. An injunction was placed permanently, excluding my entire ridgeline from any current or future HOA jurisdiction. Karen herself received 2 years probation and a court-ordered resignation from the HOA board. Amy said the judge's final words were, "You cannot govern what you do not own. You cannot control what you do not respect." I stood there in the snow, phone to my ear, and for the first time in months, I laughed, deep and honest. The mountain was mine again. I didn't throw a party. That's not who I am. But I did take the old no trespassing sign off the fence, burned it in the fire pit, and replaced it with a new one, hand-carved cedar wood sealed with linseed oil. It read, "Welcome to the Ridge. If you made it this far, you probably earned it." Amy said the press still wanted statements, interviews, op-eds. I gave her the green light to handle it all, with one condition: no twisting. No branding me as some outlaw libertarian or prepper hermit with a shotgun and a squirrel army. Just a man who didn't want a gondola on his outhouse. Silver Ridge HOA spiraled. Karen resigned in disgrace. One of her lawyers dropped her. The rest of the board voted to revise their charter and formed an external relations committee to prevent future miscommunications. Translation: they didn't want another lawsuit. A few weeks after the verdict, a couple from the HOA knocked on my gate. They brought coffee, an apology, and a homemade pie that tasted like guilt. I let them in. We sat on the porch, watched the valley breathe, and for once nobody mentioned compliance codes. The gondola plan. Dead. State auditors confirmed it violated multiple conservation guidelines. The county officially redrew the zoning map, marking my ridge as privately owned, protected by judicial order. I framed that too. Hung it right next to the deer skull in my hallway. Online, the Carantula video hit 4 million views. Some guy even made a remix. Fence drop, Karen mix. I still get tagged in it weekly. Tourists occasionally drive by hoping to see the cabin from TikTok. Most of them get lost on the switchbacks. I don't correct them. One morning, I walked down to the base of the road and saw a fresh sign installed by the county. It read, "Private property boundary. Respect the line." They finally got it. I kept the trail cams up, not out of paranoia, but principle. The ridge taught me something. You can be quiet and still get stormed. You can be lawful and still be hunted. You can have a deed and still be treated like a squatter by those who worship paper and power. But you can also win by standing firm, by documenting, by not backing down even when they send 5 inspectors and a newsletter full of lies. A few weeks later, Amy called. "Book deal," she said. I groaned. "Seriously?" "Yup. Publisher wants a memoir. Working title, Mountains Don't Join HOAs. I nearly dropped my coffee. Tell them I want full creative control." "Of course," she said. "Also, the guy from the squirrel video wants to do merch." God help me. Still, when I sat on my porch that evening, the air felt different, cleaner. I wasn't just a man on a mountain anymore. I was the man who beat an HOA on their own turf, in front of cameras, judges, and millions of strangers. But to me, the only audience that mattered was the mountain itself. And it was finally quiet again.